My friends, in October 2024, legendary GoldenEye speedrunner PerfectAce achieved a new untied world record on the stage Train 00 Agent. A world record speedrun which features some unusual properties, which have caused some to wonder whether this tactic should be considered cheating, whether it's legitimate, and all sorts of other discussions surrounding the future of GoldenEye 007 speedrunning. So let's take a look at this story of Train 00 Agent 147. But first, let me welcome you all back to the fireside, or perhaps a new fireside. I hope you can all get nice and cozy just in time to listen to this remarkable story of Ace's latest new world record. And I'll play the video for the world record on the side of the screen here while I explain the sort of controversy that's emerged behind it, and see if you can kind of figure out what's going on or what might be a little bit off or unusual about this run. Now, Train and Train 00 Agent in particular is a very difficult level to speedrun. It's a very laggy level, and so like with many speedruns on the Nintendo 64, a lot of energy is put into figuring out a way to reduce lag to better optimize your gameplay. Not only can lag sort of slow down the whole game, but it can also cause you to drop inputs. The game might not process all the button presses. And so, the game might not react to how you're playing, and you want it to react as well as possible when you're really locked in and in the zone. So a lot of energy's gone into reducing lag on Train. And one thing that people have thought about or considered at one point in time was playing with sound effects off. So just the in-game music, or maybe not even that, and the sound effects turned entirely off. Now, obviously, this makes for a very unusual sort of visual, a muted video, which, is not too uncommon back in the very early days of speedrunning. You would see videos with absolutely no sound because, it was more difficult to capture both at the same time. I believe one of the great Train players, Weister, was actually the one who first started experimenting with sound effects off. And it was pretty quickly decided that, while this, was an interesting notion, interesting thing to explore, let's not allow runs with sound effects off. It's just too weird, it's too jarring. And not only that, many cheated and faked speedruns throughout history have been caught because of analyzing the audio spectrum and it not matching up exactly. That's where the famous splice thumbnail comes from, a gap in an audio spectrum. And so if you're playing with sound off and music off, then that throws out one avenue of detection per se. And even if you play with music on, that could be added in post later. A lot of these soundtracks are available freely throughout the internet. So it was decided that we should play with sound effects on. They don't have to be fully on the whole way, only, anywhere that you're comfortable with. I believe the rule that sort of came into play was as long as you can hear some of the sound, some of the audio, the run is fine. So now if we get back to this Ace speedrun, this Train 147, with that in mind, maybe you can really start piecing together something that's going on. A little bit troll, a little bit unusual. So if you haven't figured it out yet, the sound effects on Ace's latest record are a little bit messed up. They're not off at all. You can still hear a few of the sound effects. You can still hear the firing of the watch laser and opening doors and a few shots and things and a few guard sounds, but not all. And so some of the sound effects are no longer working, explosions and many of the guard noises and so on. So how did this happen? Well, the answer is that we're not exactly sure. All we know is that it does and can happen sometimes when playing GoldenEye. And, it's almost one of those things everyone sort of played, everyone who's speedrun the game has turned on a session and felt maybe that this night there feels like there's less lag for some reason. It just feels like everything's working better. It's sort of very hard to quantify, but it happens, much in the way that, say, a race car driver might one day say, feels like my car's driving like even better than usual. And it's probably just the way the tuning works in relation to the weather and the track conditions and all that. And so this can even get more nebulous when talking about playing a Nintendo 64 video game. It's not like anyone's tuning their N64s or that the electrical grid is working differently or anything like that. But some days you turn it on and it feels like it's playing differently. Or sometimes after a very long session, it can feel like things are starting to work differently. It was only discovered in the past handful of years that actually a few of the levels in the game don't have what's called a sky texture loaded. And so what ends up happening is these levels will sort of take from the previous stage that you played that did have a sky texture loaded and give it that sky. So, I haven't speed ran myself GoldenEye for a couple of years now, but last I did was May 2022-ish. And one of the times I achieved Bunker 1 Agent 16. Well, Bunker 1 is one of those stages with no sky texture. And I found it useful to load Jungle beforehand, which then did something. It gave Bunker the attributes of Jungle's sky, which has effects on the lag in the game. Now, the Jungle is one of the most laggy stages in the game as well. And so I kind of found that it shortened the draw distance of guards, which I suppose made it where if you're looking down, maybe guards aren't rendering as far out. And whatever happened, it helped me get Bunker 1 Agent 16, a tied world record. And again, it's like the exact conditions of what is lagging where and causing what to happen are not really well known or caused. But it seems to be possible that, say, if you're playing Train for a session, even though Train is not one of those levels with a sky that is not there, you can still somehow maybe experience a session where it feels less laggy. And Ace felt one of those one night when playing Train Double Agent, and he felt like he could really give the world record, goal time 147, a new untied, a good go. He previously held the world record 148 himself and Weister. And so the thing is, he didn't want to lose this sort of feel or session that he had that night. So he ended up leaving on his Nintendo 64 for a very long time. And he would do a session every night, a few hours, not get the time he was going for, leave on the console overnight. On the 10th day of doing this, he finally achieved Train Double Agent 147. And now it's unknown if the console being on for 10 days straight is what caused the sound effect glitch. Half of the sound effects don't render. Or if it was something else in the game and he simply left on that session with the glitched audio in order to take advantage of it. Now, how much advantage is being taken here is another fair question to ask. And the answer is we don't know. So while Weister years ago was playing Train with sound effects off, and it felt better, it felt maybe a little bit less laggy, it was never quantifiable. We don't really know how much this is all saving. And it may be very hard, if not impossible, to measure these things. And so while this 147 of Ace seems strange and unusual and a little bit silly with only half of the sound effects going off, it may not have been an advantage at all. And so this is causing people to discuss, what to do with the run, if anything. Should it be allowed? Should it be disallowed? No, at the current moment in time, there was a poll held in the community, and something like 90% or more of people are saying that probably the run should be allowed to stand. And, I would agree with that. But it is interesting that, we can't definitively replicate what's going on here. Pretty much everyone who's played a substantial amount of GoldenEye will have experienced a session like this at some point where it just feels better, feels less laggy, but you can't definitively make it happen consistently. And even if you could, does it really matter? And so these are questions that the community is posed with right now, And so a bit of an investigation is taking place, not into, Ace, any malfeasance on Ace's part, but just like, can we consistently make this audio glitch happen where it drops half the sound effects roughly? And would it even be beneficial? You can sort of intuitively feel that like probably it's beneficial with no sound effects. And, because there are less things the game is rendering, and thus probably it's beneficial with half the sound effects. But to what extent? Train Double Agent in particular is a level where only 3 players have achieved world records on it in the last 10 years. Ace and Weister, the top 2 train players, who met up roughly last year and had a train session when Henrik Weister was visiting the nation of Canada. So that's pretty cool that they got to hang out and play train and share some knowledge and secrets. And the only other player to get a world record on Train Double Agent in the last 10 years is, of course, the one and only Mark Rutsu. The legend himself, Mark Rutsu. Other than those 3, you have to go back to 2006 when the big boss man achieved record on Train Double Agent. So, while there are players who have gotten really good times, top 10, top 5 times in the stage, it's not like this glitch is going to give you a free world record by any means, right? And most glitches won't, unless it's something super game-breaking in a very unoptimized game, and it's the early stages of discovering this game-breaking glitch. This is something that maybe gives Ace a 1% or less edge on his usual gameplay. It may even give no edge. It may have simply been a placebo effect. That's very possible too. So it's really unknown, if Weister got a session like this and played for 10 days straight, might he get 147? Yeah, maybe not. A player like me who's been historically bad at train, not a chance. I might not even improve my own personal record, right? So these things are important to consider as well. But I think this whole discussion sort of leads to an interesting point that we have to ponder about the future of GoldenEye speedrunning. And this is something that I've considered for a while and kind of had trouble putting into words, but it feels as though in a lot of games, you get this feeling, is speedrunning dying? There was actually a great thread made a couple years ago by fellow speedrun content creator Bismuth on this topic about how speedrunning is not dying by any metrics. More people are doing it than ever before. It's almost become mainstream and common. Like everyone knows what a speedrun is now compared to 10 years ago. But we, the people who were there 10 years ago, are getting older and moving on. And if we're still there, then much of our community is getting older and moving on. And so the faces are changing and being unfamiliar, and the games are getting older and all this kind of stuff. And so when it comes to GoldenEye, a game released in 1997, 27 years ago, you get to a point where, maybe the world records are never going to be improved again in a lot of cases. We've come close to reaching the maximum or minimum in speedrun terms because you're reducing time on a lot of these levels. The current total time in the game is 1 hour, 10 minutes, and 10 seconds. That's if you add up all of the 60 world records in the main categories together. And there's sort of been this long quest to reach 109.59 as the total time in the game, which we believe is probably going to be the last minute barrier to happen. And even as we've approached this, things have really slowed down even more and more. This 147 by Ace on Train Double Agent It's only the second untied world record this year. Bands got a Cavern Secret Agent 110, so shout out to that. And this is much fewer world records in comparison to any other year. The fewest we've seen in previous years was 6 or 7 in like 2009 was a slow year, 2011. So it's very rare to see such a slow year of very few improved world records. And the way I like to describe it is, I don't know if there's any mathematicians out there in the audience, but there's this concept of the asymptote, which is sort of a curve that as we get towards infinity or the limit, it gets close to a line, but never quite reaches it. And so if that line is the theoretical optimal time in a video game, in a speed game, that asymptote is the community kind of trimming down what they've gotten to this point, but never quite reaching there. And as time goes on, it gets harder and harder to optimize and get to that theoretical minimum, the theoretical limit of the game. And so you kind of wonder, like, how many more world records are there to be gotten? And they certainly exist. They are certainly out there. You can kind of draw a map and point to times that could be improved, but they're not happening. And this is probably to do with the game getting old, the community getting old, the players getting old. And this is sort of the destiny of every speed game. And so, while I really recommend to take a look at that Bismuth thread, I'll link it in the description. I've thought about kind of doing a deeper dive just on that topic specifically. But so while speedrunning is growing and seemingly thriving by any actual metric in terms of players and games and so on, and that's true of speedrunning, it seems like what is true of older games, or any game really, is that it is destined to die out at some point. The last ember of the community's energy will be extinguished at some point. And there are many games that are dead, frankly. There are 0 players, 0 new times, 0 new improvements. And, GoldenEye 007 is one of the more popular video games of the Nintendo 64 era, which was a pivotal era in terms of developing speedrunning as a whole. And so, it probably has a bit of life left, but we are seeing it slow down. And it doesn't help that perhaps we have to turn to these more and more unusual and unconventional techniques in order to lower the time. This really all started, I would say, in the late 2000s, early 2010s, when we discovered the use of the 2-point-X control styles, where you used 2 control styles, and one of them is usually used to move bond, and the game allows you to sort of begin the process of moving in the opening cutscene, which saves about 1/3 of a second on almost every level. And at first we allowed it because, we felt, okay, it's going to save 1/3 of a second on streets. It's very easy to do on streets, a pure strafing level. In fact, you can just press RL start, set the default on the second controller and let it be, and it does the work for you. And then on Depot, it saves 3 seconds due to a trick in the opening cutscene. It's difficult and clunky to use 2 controllers, but it's worth it on that one stage. So kind of 1 1/3 stages, we figured, we'll allow this to be used. But since then, you get all sorts of stuff like, people having these crazy rubber band setups and taping controllers to their bodies, and using parts of latex gloves to shield their thumbs, and just all these more and more kind of ridiculous and remarkable techniques used in order to really master playing GoldenEye. And then you get into strategies in-game itself that are more, luck-based. You need the super luckiest of all grenade drops or boost runs or whatever to get a world record. Now, of course, you can play a video game without speedrunning for world records, untied world records to cut the time down. Of course you can. But if that's sort of the, end mission of speedrunning a game, which I think it probably is, it just makes you wonder where the future is and how long you can keep coming up with these insane developments to lower the time. But at the end of the day, this is what happened on the most recent GoldenEye 007 Untied World Record. PerfectAce, a great train player, one of the only people who could get 147 with any regard, barring some new strategy development, got a session that had half the sound effects not there. Whether it was through just the luck of the draw turning it on one day and that being the case, or loading in some other series of levels and other things beforehand, or just by leaving the console on for 10 days, Ace got that session and took advantage of it and got 147, the newest world record in GoldenEye. And I think that's pretty cool and pretty remarkable. And just as one final addendum to this story, Ace has since revealed that he simply leaves his N64 running overnight every day, and if you do this in, say, a noisy environment with invincibility on and spawning guards constantly shooting at you, that in due time you get this glitch, and then from there you can just keep the console on with the glitched audio and play to your heart's desire. Though there's still no evidence if this actually does anything to save time, and in Ace's words, I'm not sure if the feeling is purely psychological or if there's an actual improvement in frame rate. And so, hey, if we gotta take away some kind of lesson or moral from this story, something like don't put all your eggs in one basket, or don't count your chickens before they hatch out of the egg, I would say the lesson is, don't think you'll be getting trained 00 Agent 147 even if you do leave the console on for 10 days. So there's that story. I hope you enjoyed this new fireside setup. I hope to be back here very regularly, probably more frequently than ever, sharing these sorts of stories with you. And I hope you will join me for those. So, my friends, thanks for coming. Thanks for watching. Stay true, and I'll see you next time by the fireside.